Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jen Bordeaux, and this is another segment of Family Law Uncorked. Today, I'm coming to you with two awesome guests. And you guys probably look a little different on each other's screens, but for me, I have Allison above me and Sarah below me. So, but in any case, I'm joined by Sarah Hink, one of the attorneys and partners here at New Direction Family Law. And then I'm also joined by Allison Lukanich, who is with, and I don't want to murder the name of the firm. So what's the name of the firm that you're with, Allison?
Bashyam Shah.
Yes. Okay. Which is an immigration law firm. So as we've been doing these family law uncorked since, as Sarah was chatting right before we started, but since March, we've covered a lot of topics, some related directly to COVID and the global pandemic going on. Some not so directly related. But today we kind of have a mixture there, again, dealing with COVID and immigration law, as well as with the intersection of family law. But before we jump into that, Allison, can I ask you just to introduce yourself and you want to tell us how you got into immigration law or whatever you'd like to say?
Yeah, of course. So I started practicing immigration law right out the bat from law school about 8 years ago now. Wow, it's crazy, it's been 8 years. I went to law school knowing I wanted to practice immigration law. I was very lucky to have the opportunity to study abroad a few different times during my undergrad years. And I spent a summer in Mexico, followed by an entire semester in Chile. And during those times, just kind of really expanding my worldview, I became fluent in Spanish, just really understood why people sought to immigrate here, some legally, some not so much, but just, fleeing what they, extreme poverty and violence and things like that. And just decided I wanted to dedicate my career to serving those people. So very lucky that I've been able to do that and obviously use my language skills throughout the years. Of course, not every one of my clients is Spanish speaking, but, being able to serve that immigrant community. And I get a lot of personal, satisfaction from that as well.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Sarah, anything that you want to add about you and your practice with family law?
Well, first, Allison, that's great. I wish I was even half fluent in Spanish. I only took it in high school and been lucky enough to retain some of it just from working before law school and through college in the restaurant industry, which sees a lot of Hispanic workers and in that area. So I always tell people when they're learning Spanish, don't take it for granted. Use it when you can. Travel abroad because it's such an amazing gift to be able to speak more than just English, because the world speaks all these other languages, and we just all sit here in America and pretty much speak English, but a huge population of our country is fluent in more than just one language. So that's terrific. And we obviously, as family law attorneys, do run into immigration questions and issues. And oftentimes we have to reach out to immigration attorneys to answer those for ourselves. In law school, I didn't take immigration law, so I really don't know very much because it's not something that you find on the bar exam that you have to study, but it is very detailed oriented, and you really do need to talk to someone who works closely with immigration law or perhaps is all they practice. So thank you so much, Allison, for being a resource for us and for helping our viewers today with that.
Yeah, no, of course, I'm happy to do this with y'all today.
Yeah, ditto. Ditto to what Sarah said. And Sarah, you brought it up talking about traveling abroad, and I think that's a great place for us to start as far as the topic of our conversation today, because I know several people, myself included, that were supposed to travel abroad during this time. And Sarah, when it kicked off, you were coming back from traveling abroad, and you didn't really realize what it had culminated to here in the United States until you got back and you quarantined and everything. But so several of us have been affected with traveling abroad during this time and for the somewhat foreseeable future for sure. So how does that work though for someone, Allison, that is here on a visa or, green card status as far as these travel bans that have been put in place?
So it depends. We have clients that are both stuck outside of the United States and can't come back in, as well as clients who are stuck inside the United States and can't leave. So, because a lot of countries have closed their borders completely to any international incoming flights whatsoever. So there's a lot of clients here now on temporary, either work visas or just, tourist visas, whatever that we've needed to file extensions for, where they never intended to stay. They don't want to stay. They want to get back home, but they can't physically leave right now. And the other end of it, there are a lot of people that want to be able to come back. The US has 3 travel bans in place as related to COVID from China, from Iran, and from basically all of Europe. So if you are in any of those countries, I think the only caveat is you can go to a different country, not subject to the ban, quarantine 14 days, and then fly direct from that country. But very few people have either the means or the ability to do that. So right now we're just trying to navigate, it really is a case by case, a country by country basis. And again, it's a mixture of the US reopening to these countries, the airlines started, because airlines completely cut back flights because they were losing money. So even countries, I have a lot of clients from India right now, and India put a very strict travel ban in place, more strict than the United States. So you couldn't go in or out. And they're starting to reopen India now, but there's so few flights available that the costs are astronomical and people just can't really navigate. And all we can really say right now is you just have to be patient, document your efforts to return, because green card holders, for example, they can only be outside the country for 6 months at a time. So a lot of clients that are coming up on that 6-month mark are terrified they're going to lose their residency, their green card status, but they can't physically return. So it's just a lot of, we'll see what happens when you can come back. Just hang tight, document every effort, and hopefully it'll work out. But we're just living in such unprecedented times. Who could? There's no rules to this right now.
Have there been any legislative intent that you've heard of to change those rules, or just do a temporary extension of 6 months at all? Any talk about that?
Nothing legislative. It's very discretionary as to whether someone has abandoned their status when they leave for more than 6 months. So it's at the discretion of Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, at the airport. So traditionally, I would say, well document your case. Just tell the officer why you were gone for so long. You have the canceled tickets, you've got, COVID. It shouldn't need an explanation, but this is the Trump administration and they're very anti-immigrant, and sometimes they look for any opportunity to, deny a discretionary benefit or to cause problems for someone. So that's where the fear, I think, is coming from, that had we had a different administration or an administration a little more transparent that is capable of saying, the head of CBP could issue a statement and say, you know what, we're going to relax this rule. It's going to be okay. Just get back when you can safely get back. People would be fine. But unfortunately, that's not our government right now.
Yeah. And I see they're really just making it stricter. I keep hearing that there's concern about students. And if their classes are virtual, then they are no longer, they won't be able to, their green card, or how's that working out?
So the Trump administration is using COVID to try to basically eliminate a lot of avenues for legal immigration. And there's a lot of us in the immigration attorney community that think this has kind of been the plan all along, and now they finally have the excuse. So the issue with student visas is what the Trump administration is saying is that if it is all virtual learning, you don't need to be here to do it. You don't need to physically be in the United States to attend virtual learning. So we're not going to extend your visa status. Which is a huge, there's these universities, especially public universities. If you're an international student attending a public university in the United States, you're paying out-of-state tuition. You are not eligible for financial aid or a private scholarship, sure, but no financial aid. No, these people are paying tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket to be able to attend, for the privilege of being educated in the United States, and the government's just shutting the door to them. And a lot of these people are people that end up getting job offers and investing back in this country. So it's a huge problem, just that this administration is being so anti-immigrant that they're, just shutting this door and turning off the possibility of future economic growth, development, entrepreneurship, which a lot of these students become, and they invest back here. So it's really a huge problem right now.
And a lot of times they invest in our science fields and our medical fields, and that is terrible. And I saw some things where professors were like, I'll come and teach in person. We can't let this happen. And it's sad that we're having to rely on professors who put themselves in danger, of illnesses to get around that and keep those students here. A lot of changes. I'm sure y'all are very busy.
Yeah, we are staying. It's a lot of management of expectations, and unfortunately, the way the media sometimes will get a headline, and it only applies to a small subset of people, but then the phone's ringing off the hook because everyone is concerned and worried it's going to bother them and affect them. And there's just a lot of just kind of education and knowledge that we as immigration attorneys have to do, so that our clients and prospective clients or whoever out there just understands, no, this doesn't apply to you, or yes, this does, and here's how you need to protect yourself, and things like that.
I mean, that's a scary thing to think and see a headline and think, oh, well, I'm going to be uprooted from what I consider to be my home, and this is where my life is, my family, my new family, my employment, what have you, and that doesn't even consider what they might have to go back to should they be have to be deported. So that is scary. It's fully valid.
Yeah.
And that actually that's a great segue. Looking at a more direct intersection point for or potential intersection point for family law and immigration is our domestic violence situations. We find a lot in our office that can be a catalyst or an initiating point for a separation, leading to divorce, and getting out of a domestic violence situation. So how does that play into immigration situations?
So the biggest thing in domestic violence, to be able to potentially benefit, having been the victim of domestic violence does open the door to various immigration statuses. But the biggest issue is that victim has to speak out. That victim needs to report to the police. That victim needs to separate, work through a divorce in certain contexts. And COVID right now is being a huge bar to that. You can't, people are afraid to leave their homes. The police station, there's less deputies available to take reports. There's, the courts, while yes, they're still open and they're still processing, for protective orders and things like that, that information's not readily available, especially in immigrant communities. So there's potentially this whole group of individuals that could otherwise, be accessible to, or that are, there's these resources that are available that they can't take advantage of right now. And that's a huge issue, I think, in both, for both, family law practitioners as well as immigration practitioners, because, we just want to and Sarah, I don't know if you can speak to this, but when I have a domestic violence victim, I sometimes just want to grab her and just say, you can do this. You're going to be okay. We're going to get you connected, but now we're doing things over Zoom and the phone, and it's just not as personal, and it's a lot harder sometimes to get that point across in that manner.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I miss the attorney-client interaction in person. And especially for, you think a lot of the victims of domestic violence is that they've been, family and friends have been removed from them. So they don't always have a good support system, because that's something that the abuser does, is isolate them from those support systems. So there's not a lot of people around her to encourage her or him to, go to court, seek this protective order. And if that person is an immigrant and that's, that's their only attachment here, then you're going to remove your financial support as well. They're scared of that. I have cases where a lot of times the abuser will use that to their advantage and say, I control the money. You have nowhere to go here. You're going to lose your status. And this person, the victim, doesn't know what to do. Do they just stay in with the abuse and think that that's the best way to protect herself and have money come in, at least through him? And there are avenues to go after the financial resources as well, but it can be so daunting at the very beginning. So that is bad. And we've also had cases where the person that's here on a visa is the alleged abuser, which isn't always the truth, that people realize that, okay, well, if I say that she's the abuser, then I'll get out of having to provide financial support. So I don't know, Allison, if you ever run across those situations and what you can do.
We have, in our office, I personally take the perspective that I first and foremost, as an immigration attorney, I assist immigrants. Now, I may be selective about who I'm representing and what they are or not accused of, but I unfortunately get phone calls every once in a while of a US citizen or green card holder saying, well, my spouse has done X, Y, and Z. I want to get them deported. What do I do? And that's not my role, right? I'm not ICE. I'm not Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I don't enforce our immigration laws. So, I of course decline those. There's nothing legally I could do for that individual anyways, but of course those are very big concerns, because abuse does go on both ways. And a lot of times in certain communities, when you're playing up, cultural issues as well, that in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of arranged marriages, and US citizen women are arranged with immigrant men, in part because of the ability to bring that person over and give them lawful status. And then it becomes an abusive relationship. And what does that US citizen woman want? Not necessarily to get someone deported, but a lot of times they just need to sit down and hear what their rights and responsibilities are. And it can be a huge issue, because they're not just breaking up with a partner, but they're breaking up families, and they're breaking up this these cultural connections and this. So it can be a really big issue. But like I said, from an enforcement standpoint, I stay far away from that, because that's not my role. But of course, from an informational standpoint, just let people know if they're halfway through an immigration process and the US citizen decides they want to separate, sometimes they do need counsel, like what will that look like for them if they don't, keep moving forward on the case and keep pursuing the case.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
So in that situation, if you're married and you're going through the process of becoming legalized, are there other avenues that you can say, okay, well, this one's obviously not going to stay in effect, and this is not going to happen? What can they do to kind of like pivot and try another way?
So the biggest, unfortunately, the US citizen, or the petitioner, we would call them, so they can either be a US citizen or a green card holder. They hold all the cards, because without their kind of signature and their consent throughout the process, the beneficiary or the immigrant spouse can't receive any status. So there can be a big power struggle where, it can be that abusive relationship, because they do hold all the cards legally. So, if the relationship is not working out and they no longer want to pursue the process, again, as the citizen or green card holder, that's their right. But depending on the nature of the relationship, there is what's called VAWA, or the Violence Against Women Act. It does not just apply to women, it does also apply to men. That's just what it's called. So a VAWA case would be for someone married to a US citizen or green card holder who has been, it doesn't need to be abused, but subject to extreme cruelty. So it can fall short of physical violence, but of course, extreme cruelty does involve, emotional, mental abuse. There's all sorts of things in that power dynamic. And those cases allow the beneficiary, the immigrant, to file independently of their spouse. So while they're going through the separation and divorce process, it allows them to basically self-sponsor themselves for green card status on the basis of this controlling, negative, extreme cruelty relationship. So that is, one great option. The hard part with those cases is having them be well documented, because you still need to prove that the relationship was legitimate and was not solely for the purposes of obtaining green card status, and a lot of times, the US citizen will withhold data, will withhold evidence, in the separation. They need just proof they live together, a lease agreement, a copy of a deed of the house, and the US citizen will withhold that. And it can be a big struggle to try to negotiate just to get these things back, or this documentation.
Do you have the subpoena power during that process where you could subpoena those kind of things, or no?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, if there is a simultaneous family law case going on, you can coordinate with the family law attorney to do that. But this is just an affirmative benefit that you're applying for. It's outside of the court context. So there would be no one to issue a subpoena to try to get that paperwork. It would just, a lot of times, sometimes, again, this was more pre-Trump administration, but sometimes a well-written affidavit explaining from the applicant their efforts made to obtain such documentation could go a long way, as well with corroboration from other family and friends who, well, she moved in with me when this happened, and I called the husband a few times, and I tried to do these, that will go a long way. Even now in the Trump administration, it's possible to try to corroborate through, I guess, secondary evidence, but it's really hard in that kind of power balance struggle, because of course in a somewhat of even short of an abusive relationship, but when the US citizen holds all those cards, it can be really, really hard. Once the spouse makes a decision to leave the relationship, it can be really hard to, just from a paperwork standpoint, get what's needed to be successful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And does any of the status of the VAWA, or whenever someone's going through separation or divorce, and you've got with their immigrant status, does that extend to children in those scenarios, or how does that work?
Yes. So any children that have the same status as mom or dad in that scenario, they could file as derivatives. So they would be covered as long as they're under 21 and unmarried. They would be covered. So if mom files, derivative children are automatic. Well, not automatically, but they're included in that process. So they would be, safe and protected. And the good thing about VAWA is you can petition for an immediate, while the case is, so traditionally in any immigration status, you need to wait so many months until the work permit and just the visa needs to be approved before you have the ability to work and do things like that. The law under VAWA creates a provision that you can seek a faster avenue by which to have employment authorization, get a work permit, so you can kind of get on your feet a little bit faster, which now with processing times, it still takes a couple months, but it's a big help to most individuals going through that.
Everything seems to take a long time in the immigration law world.
It does. It really does. And it's only going to get worse, unfortunately. So with COVID, USCIS is our main affirmative benefits agency, United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. They were closed from like mid-March, and they're reopened now, but they're still not at the same capacity of holding interviews and adjudicating cases. And now news has broke that they are out of money, and they are furloughing 65% of their staff.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, they have about 20,000 employees, and over 13,000 are being furloughed starting August 3rd. So we really have no idea. I mean, hopefully they're going to get some emergency funding from Congress, or they're talking about increasing fees so that, because they're a fee-funded agency, so they make money off of what immigrants pay for these various processes. They don't receive much taxpayer money. So the issue with the Trump administration has discouraged people from pursuing legal forms of immigration and filing these cases. So now there's no more money because not enough people are filing. So we're really not sure what it's going to do, other than probably double at least processing times, which is going to be a huge deterrent to a lot of people. And not to bash too much on the Trump administration, because that's not the purpose of this call, but I think that was kind of their plan, right? Like, you make things more difficult, people get discouraged from filing. Oh, now the agency's out of money. Oh, well,
Right, but I mean, then you force more people to come here illegally and not go through the proper mechanisms,
right.
which
it makes the problem a lot worse. Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes the problem a lot worse instead of fixing it. So only time will tell. Those of you watching, get out and vote. Make your voice heard. It's very important. There's a lot of people in the country that do work that we need, and there's a lot that needs to change within the immigration system right now.
And you think, okay, well, you don't like illegal, if you're going to use that term, illegal citizens or people being here. Well, do some thought process into why maybe they haven't gone through the many years sometimes that it takes to get legalized here, and why things are the way they are, and focus more on solving a problem than just saying, I don't like that problem.
Exactly. Don't make it worse. The laws are in place, and the laws provide an avenue for many people. We don't need to restrict F1 student visas and stop granting we don't need to be doing these things right now, because these are people that contribute, that are here, that are putting money into the economy. Like I said, for public universities, it's a huge source of funding, because they're paying out of state tuition without any grants, without any scholarship, without any, federal financial aid. I mean, these are people that help these universities move forward. So
contribute to our communities. So it's definitely a good thing in many respects, whether it's someone going to school or someone working on a farm to bring us our food. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up too much of you guys' time because I know that you guys are both very busy, but one question that I think you both can probably lend an answer to for our viewers, again, relating to the intersection of family law and immigration law, revolves around custody. I know personally in our office, we've had several situations where someone is worried that their spouse is going to leave and go to a different country and take the kids with them. I know there's been instances of passports having to be, controlled as where they're being held to prevent things like that. So, Allison, I would imagine you've probably had people come to clients or potential clients come to you with these concerns too. So can you guys speak to that on both sides of the spectrum from immigration and family law standpoint?
Well, as you mentioned, if there's threats of taking the children out of the country and everyone's still here, and there's an active ongoing custody litigation in the courts, the judges can order that the passports be held by, one of the attorneys in the case, or sometimes there's a parent coordinator that will hold the passports and any green cards that are out there, and trying to be a third person to control that passports. There's that. But then if someone has already left the country with the child, that's going to be the biggest issue. That's when, what can you do? We have jurisdiction here in North Carolina. We have laws that control how we interact with other states. So a parent taking a child from North Carolina and going to California is going to be an easier, I don't want to call it fix, but it'll be easier to tackle that situation than if someone takes a child from North Carolina and goes to India. So we have to look to the Hague Convention and say, okay, well, what country did they take the child to? Is that country in a part of the Hague Convention? And so what the Hague Convention is supposed to do is figure out what country should have the child custody hearing and then determine where the child should be. So if it goes that far where the child's already been removed from the U.S., then it's going to be a long process of going through all the necessary procedures that the Hague requires, service, and it can be an expensive process if you're going to have a private attorney assist you with that, because there is a lot of work and it does take a lot of time. So I don't know, Allison, if you've gotten involved in any of those cases?
Yeah, my experience with that is more, unfortunately, when the child has already been removed from the country. Traditionally, after, in a lot of times, again, talking about this power struggle, where one parent is undocumented here, so not able to leave the country and travel, and the U.S. citizen or green card holder parent is like, oh, well, I'll take them for vacation, we'll go visit family, and then they keep them there and decide not to bring them back. And unfortunately, due to a lot of times lack of resources, they really don't have the financial means to really fight it out here because jurisdiction is lost. And a lot of these countries, I mean, they're just very corrupt. It just takes a very long time. A lot of these countries are very male dominated. So when it's the father of the child that is kind of taking the child away, it's a lot easier for that father to maintain custody in the home country. But they do have the options of getting the FBI involved at times because it can be considered kidnapping in certain circumstances. They can get the U.S. consulate or embassy in that country involved to try to help negotiate and facilitate a return. But it can be really challenging, like I said, without really doing a full court press just to fight for that custody. But my experiences with this issue have been in Mexico and Guatemala, and both times it was the mothers in the U.S., the fathers took the child out, and unfortunately were unable to get it resolved because the courts ended up granting full custody to the fathers. Because, well, if mom wanted to fight for the child, mom should come here and attend the hearing. And well, if mom does that, there's 3 other kids here. And what happens to that? So it's never an easy fix, unfortunately. And my advice in that scenario is always consult with a family law attorney before you allow a trip outside the country for your child. You can get some custody agreement in writing, and then you would have more recourse. If they extend that trip or take them out for longer or whatever the circumstance may be.
Good advice.
Yeah. Well, we did have somebody, I know I said I was going to wrap it up, and I am, but we did have somebody write in with a question. And their question is, how long does the marriage green card process for H-1B spouse beneficiary take as per the current COVID situation?
That is a great question, and I wish I could answer. It does depend on jurisdiction. It depends on where you're living. So certain field offices processes cases much faster than others, just because of how many clients are living, or how many immigrants, and how busy that field office is. So pre-COVID, just to give an example, cases like that in the Raleigh area were taking about 4 to 6 months from the time of filing to interview and approval. Now there's obviously a couple month backlog that they're working through. So I was kind of doubling processing times because everything was shut down for about 4 months. But when we track on the fact that all these employees might be furloughed in the next couple of weeks, it could double or triple. So what used to take 4 to 6 months, maybe we're talking 8 to 12, and maybe potentially doubling that because of the furlough. So it's hard to know for sure, but the sooner you file, I'm still encouraging people to file. The only way USCIS is going to get back on their feet is if people are paying these filing fees and going through this process. So the sooner people file, they kind of get their place in line, and at least it'll be processing.
So is this similar to, and this is going to be a dumb question, but to like the 90-day Fiance, like a TV show process? So I've watched a couple episodes of that during this whole, stay-at-home phase, and I didn't really understand that process.
Yes. So 90 days, and actually that is probably terrible for an immigration lawyer to admit. It is a guilty pleasure show of mine. It's interesting to see like reality TV's version of what I do for a living,
Right.
So the process for 90 Day Fiance is a little bit different. When the beneficiary is outside of the country, the US citizen files a petition here that says, hey, we're in a relationship, we want to get married within 90 days of their entry, they're free to marry, so prior relationships have been divorced. And here's proof that we love each other, we're together. Once that case is approved, the case is forwarded to the consulate of the country where the immigrant is living, and then they go to their visa interview, and if all goes well, they travel over here. They have the 90 days to get married. Most of my clients will go to the courthouse and get married the first week or so the case just starts processing faster. I love how the show makes a big deal about the wedding planning and getting it all within 90 days. It's like that doesn't happen in real life. But they get married and then they file the green card paperwork. So the answer to my previous question, that 4 to 6 months is what it used to take. That's what it would take for someone who'd entered and gotten married on a fiance visa. But there's a lot of processing that happens at the front end before they get here, probably about a year of processing between filing the petition stateside and doing the interview at the consulate abroad.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
I can watch that show with more knowledge now.
Yeah, there you go. Well, again, Allison, thank you for joining us today. Sarah, you're right across the office, but thank you for sharing some of your time with us today. And for those watching, I mean, just between what you heard today with, the immigration law side of things and also in family law, I mean, it's all just, as Allison mentioned earlier, unprecedented, where we're having some of the same backlog issues with family law, just given cases that were continued from March and then had to be, things that had to be continued again. So it was backlogged prior to COVID. So we're all kind of weaving our way through this web that COVID has got for us. So, but we'll figure it out. We will trudge through it, and we'll get it all figured out and help people as much as we can along the way. So again, Allison, thank you. Sarah, thank you. If you guys have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us via our website, via social media avenues. You can call the office at 919-719-3470. And Allison, if somebody is interested in finding out more information or, interested in your services or your firm services, because I know you offer more than just the family and domestic immigration services there too, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
They can give our office a call, 919-833-0840, or you can email me directly, Allison, ALLISON, @BashyamShah.com.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you guys so much. For those of you watching that asked questions, thank you. And we will see you next time for another segment of Family Law Uncorked. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yep.
Bye-bye.